The last time we ended with Esau despising his birthright and Jacob taking it. And we learned that Jacob's name has nothing to do with deceiver. It means heel grabber, because that's what he was doing when he came out of the womb. So there's kind of a bit to cover here. And we also learned that Isaac is the only monogamous of all the patriarchs, which some people take as an interesting data point. Because Isaac is largely just a connective figure between Abraham and Jacob. If you look at his story and you read the stuff that's written about him, he's this bound kid, and then he's married and has kids. And then he gets one chapter in Genesis devoted to his kind of life events, and that's Genesis 26. So we're going to do like we did last time and have been doing, where I'm just going to cut in as we go, because I think that's a little easier on us on time. And today we're going to actually hear from about 4 different scholars on some things here, because there's a lot of interesting stuff that happens here, not the least of which is the replay of the same situation that Abraham found himself in when he lied to the king of the Philistines, which is anachronistic. So, again, by Isaac's time, the Philistines are not in this area. So whoever changed the name of the people group that they were encountering to Philistines did so that you would understand enemy. Okay? The people that they are encountering in this land, the Philistines, are not constantly at war like they're described elsewhere in the Bible, the other Philistines. Okay, so this is obviously a different group of people that got this name slapped on them just to identify them. Or maybe this was the same name because, look, sometimes groups just shared names because they come from tribes, and most often the tribes are named after some guy. So, that was interesting. Now there was a famine in the land besides the former famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. That little beside the former famine is the editor letting you know that he's there. Hi, I'm here. This is me letting you know that this is something I want you to understand that isn't in the text that I'm putting in here for you. And Isaac went to Gerar to King Abimelech of the Philistines. And Sarna notes here there's no possible way that this could be the same king as before. Okay, so if this is King Abimelech, this is like a family name like George or Henry. You know, there's Henry VIII. There's a lot of guys named Henry in that family. So Abimelech is probably just a family name because this is like 75 years later if you trace this out. So no way the same guy could still be king. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Settle in the land that I shall show you." That's a fun one to say together. "Reside in this land as an alien, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and to your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will fulfill the oath that I swore to your father Abraham." And so right there we could have like a fun little preaching point that sometime God gives you a promise that you don't ever get to see. Because Abraham's dead. Okay, and so the promise that was given to Abraham is going to be fulfilled through someone else. Okay, so I don't know what that does to our charismatic prophecy brains. Sometimes that can break things. And it's okay, take 2 Tylenol. And it'll be okay. No. "I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands, and all the nations of the earth shall gain blessing for themselves through your offspring." Sounds awfully familiar. "Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So Isaac settled in Gerar." Sounds like a pretty smart thing to do. If all that's being promised. I'm going to give you everything and make sure you're very, very wealthy. Okay, I'll stay here. "When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, 'She is my sister.' For he was like, there's not really much buildup here, is there? There's no like, oh, and he planted a vineyard and he became drunk and it's just, oh, by the way, one time, and we know kind of what that means when stories do this. "So when the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, 'She is my sister.' For he was afraid to say, 'My wife,' thinking, or else the men of this place might kill me for the sake of Rebekah, because she is attractive in appearance. There's an awful lot there that the narrator knows about what's going on inside the private thoughts of a character in the story. Okay? That's something that we should keep in mind when we're reading these stories. When the author and the narrator seem to know a whole lot about the private thoughts of what's going on with a character, 9 times out of 10, that's because it's a character. And the author knows the character. Okay? When Isaac had been there a long time, King Abimelech I'll just say it now. Klaus Westermann calls this chapter a mosaic of Isaac stories. Okay? And so the difference in a narrative, like we had the narrative of Abraham, and all the stories about Abraham are like, and then he did this, and then he did this, and then he did this, and then, right? And so it's like, and even in the Hebrew, like the wording is this, and then, and then, and then. So you see, it's like, okay, I know this is narrative. This is how it works. These are stories. Some of them are very, very true. They're meant to be historical, but the way these stories are put together, it's more like once there was this. Once there was this. And then there was this. And there's no chronological order to these things. Okay? And so that's kind of indicative here, too, in the fact that we've already met the 2 twins, right, in the chapter before. And Sarna points out it would be awfully hard to convince someone that this woman was your sister if you had twin babies. So chronologically, this story is out of place, if it happened at all. Okay? Again, this is, Westermann calls it a literary tie to the Abraham story. Okay, so Abraham has done this, and so we're going to tie it together with Isaac doing the same thing. So when Isaac had been there a long time, King Abimelech of the Philistines looked out of a window and saw him fondling his wife Rebekah. Fondling is a good word because the Hebrew word is very much a sexual word. Okay, he wasn't just like playing with her. And so this king looks at his window and he's got one of 2 choices here. This guy comes from a group of people that it's okay to have sex with your sister, or he's lying to me. So Isaac, following in his father's footsteps, being the good liar. So Abimelech called for Isaac and said, "So she is your wife. Why then did you say she is my sister?" Isaac said to him, "Because I thought I might die because of her." It's a manly thing to do. But we did talk about this before. Who's going to take care of her if the guy that's supposed to take care of her gets whacked by some king? Not much you can do. I mean, you can't really fight back. This is a king. It's not like some thief that's just come into the home. Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife shall be put to death." Just in the natural, that's a pretty strange response for finding out. He could have just told, hey, she's not actually his sister. He doesn't have to say, if you touch him, I'm going to kill you. So there's some weird protections going on here. Isaac sowed seed in that land, and in the same year reaped 100-fold. Is that in any way connected to the story we just read? No. Okay, so mosaic of Isaac stories is kind of how this works. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich. He prospered more and more until he became very wealthy. So rich and wealthy are different, at least in this author's viewpoint. He had possessions of flocks and herds and a great household, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped up and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of his father Abraham. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, you have become too powerful for us." So Isaac departed from there and camped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of his father Abraham, for the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham, which we just heard, and he gave them the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herders of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herders, saying, "The well water is ours." So he called the well Eshek because they contended with him. Now, in English, we don't get that. Okay, but very, very prevalent in the Hebrew Bible is pun and wordplay, and the word Eshek means quarrel. Okay, and so they're really just like, there's a well called Eshek, and so this is just, they're saying this is how it happened. This is the naming of this place. This is going to be important in just a second. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one also. So he called it Sitnah. Anybody know what just happened? That's the first occurrence of Satan in the Bible. This is Genesis 26. It took 26 chapters to meet the word S-T-N in the Bible. That gets later on is Satan. This is a different form of it, but it comes from that. So you see the consonants in there, S-T-N-H. That's, etymologically, that's a big word for related in letters. Etymologically linked to the name S-T-N, which later on becomes Satan. Okay? And what are they doing here? They're quarreling. They're adversaries to each other. And the noun STN meant something like adversary. It didn't mean evil being. It didn't mean bizarro God, God's yang. It's not any of that. It's some of the ancient mythologies about Satan have him as God's assassin. But they're not as old as this kind of stuff where the word is actually being used in different forms. And it's not, you don't get stuck with, oh, well, it's a proper name of a proper being who has all power and it's like God's equal, and like, really? No, it's a word that comes from a specific place. And here we're meeting that word in a different context where it's become the name of a well. And they name it that because there was a quarrel. People became adversaries with each other there. Okay? And so we got to remember the vowels are put there by Masoretes in like the Middle Ages in these texts. Okay, so these very ancient texts had no vowels. So when you read this in Hebrew, it's S-T-N-H. Okay, and so even though they say Sitnah because that's what they know, the consonants are still related. Okay, so it's just, this is how language develops, and I think when we hit these points in the Bible, it's important to point them out. Because it's like people are like, oh no, the first appearance of Satan in the Bible is in the garden. And it's like, no, it actually doesn't say that. Like, that's a snake who talks, and he is never called the devil or Satan or anything. It's called a snake that talks. So we should probably kind of categorize that story correctly. When animals talk, it's usually people are like, fact. No, that's the wrong answer. At least it's mythologized history. Okay, back to Genesis 26. He moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. Well, fancy that. So they had two that they quarreled over and one that they didn't. Good for them. No reasoning why, by the way. Like, maybe is the water taste good out of one, not out of the other? Now, this one's closer to my flock and that one's closer. I don't know. Doesn't say. It's kind of just assumed that you know. So he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called it Rehoboth, saying, "Now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." I'm going to look that word up because I think that is... don't know. From there, he went up to Beersheba. Now, we're about to see something happen, and I'll read the other part where we've already been that is going to prove my point, where we need to do something with how we're reading the text, okay? Because without the aid of maybe a scholar or someone helping us, we're going to see the Bible disagreeing with itself, okay? Okay, so here goes. And that very night the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you and will make your offspring numerous for my servant Abraham's sake." So he built an altar there, called on the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. Then Abimelech went to him from Gerar with Ahuzoth his advisor and Phicol the commander of his army. Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you?" They said, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you, so we say, let there be an oath between you and us, and let us make covenant with you, so that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good and have sent you away in peace. You are now blessed of the Lord." So he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. In the morning they rose early and exchanged oaths, and Isaac set them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug, and he said to him, "We have found water." He called it Sheba. Therefore the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. And then we'll read the last two verses in just a second. So in Genesis 21, we heard something different about how Beersheba got its name. Anybody remember that? The words Beersheba in Hebrew means 7 wells. Okay? And in that particular chapter, Abraham's name is mentioned 7 times, and so is Abimelech's name, and then they dig 7 wells. And then conveniently they name the location, not the city, Beersheba. Okay? And then and it says there, basically because, actually let's just, I have it in my notes, let me just read it, because it says why they called it Beersheba, and it doesn't agree. So this is Genesis 21, and then verses 22 to about 30-something. I'll just stop where I'm ready. At that time, Abimelech with Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, "God is with you in all that you do." Again, how is this dude still alive so much later in time? What a strange story. "Now, therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my offspring or with my posterity. But as I have dealt loyally with you, you will deal with me and with the land where you have resided as an alien." And Abraham said, "I swear it." When Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, "I do not know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today." So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the 2 men made a covenant. A lot of overlap, right, between the 2 stories. Are you hearing it? Okay. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs of the flock, and Abimelech said to Abraham, "What is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart?" He said, "These 7 ewe lambs you shall accept from my hand in order that you may be a witness for me that I dug this well." Therefore, that place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. That's a different reason why the place is called Beersheba, okay? One is because of something that happens between Isaac and Abimelech, and another is because of something that happens between Abraham and Abimelech. And in Abraham's story, he digs 7 wells, and Sheba is the word for 7. And so there's all this connection there, right, that isn't in the Isaac story, except for the fact that both Isaac and Abimelech are mentioned 7 times in that story as well. Okay, so you see what's going on, right? Like, even though we don't write our literature this way, they did. Okay, and so when they start doing this kind of stuff, it's because, hey, this is what we want, this is what's salient to the story. Salient means like important, like this is what's like focal here. Isaac and Beersheba and the place that this is ours. Okay, why? Because it's ours. Why? Because our patriarchs named it. 2 of them, in fact, differently, but the same name, but for different reasons. And therefore, some editor says, it's called Beersheba to this day. However, I want to read what Sarna says here because I think he's really, really helpful. In fact, let's do this because I want to read the last 2 verses of this chapter, and then we'll go back and I'll read you what the scholars say, and then we'll get out of here. Man, I did that in like 20 minutes. That's good. So verse 34 of Genesis 26 and verse 35 are a little dig here, but they do kind of let you know why things don't look so good for Esau. When Esau was 40 years old, Oh man, this hits close to home. He married Judith, daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. So that means when he was 40, he married 2 women and moved back in with mom and dad. I hopefully have not made life bitter for my parents. However, this is a little bit of a dig at Esau, right? Because the woeful Edomites are coming as an enemy. We're not there yet. We haven't met them as an enemy yet. But what we have to do when we are telling the origin story of the Edomites is continually make sure that you know that the guy who started them is a bastard in every way possible. He despised his birthright. He made life miserable for his parents. His progeny is deserving of our hatred. Right? And this, so we've got to keep in mind, like the Bible's always leapfrogging itself backwards and forwards. Okay? Because why? Because most likely, like almost all of Genesis was actually put to parchment during the Babylonian exile. So ancient stories are given a context current to where they are at the time. Right? So there's things that are thrown, and we see it all through, like especially the early parts of Genesis and all the Babylonian comparisons, and even like deity names from Babylon are like deified in Hebrew language. And so and same with Canaanite deities, and unless you know that, you don't see it, and it becomes these like, well, I have to follow what this book says. Nonsense. You can't. I think by now we've proven that it is impossible to follow what the book says, because as we just saw, there are times when the book doesn't even agree with itself. Why? Because it's not trying to be followed. These are stories from an ancient culture that some of this ancient culture was, in their own stories, was annihilated by their deity for worshiping other gods. In what way do you want to emulate that culture? I'm serious. Like it's, when you read Ezekiel, I'd challenge you to go read Ezekiel. And instead of thinking of Ezekiel as this like, oh, this is an old covenant prophet of doom and gloom, think of Ezekiel as someone who loves Yahweh, who firsthand saw the atrocities that they were doing in his temple and at his altar. Okay? And saw his people say things like Yahweh stands over the host of Israel in the Exodus, right? And who cares about the debates about what group of Israelites that was? But it's God talking, and he says, I am the Lord your healer. And Ezekiel says, you went off to Egypt and looked for the healer God. And it's like, oh, this is what they're doing. And so he's not saying, even though we read it like, oh, God's coming to get you, what he's saying is like, Babylon just wiped you out because of what you were doing. And this is biblical prophecy, right? They write it like they were standing before it, looking at it coming, but they actually were standing at it, looking at it having happened. And they're going, why did this happen? And they write it as a prophecy to tell you why it happened, but it's going to, you know what I'm saying? So it's like when you get a prequel to a movie. Okay, we didn't invent prequels. Okay, so when you read that and you see, it's like, have a little sympathy for what is going on in Yahweh's temple in ancient Israel. And, even though I don't have to personally believe, because my theology doesn't matter, but I don't have to personally believe whether, God came down and did, like, it's not about what God did. It's about the fact that the people group is no more. And one of their own kind says, and here's why. And in their case, they were having sex at Yahweh's altars with instruments made of gold. And they were worshiping other deities, specifically named things that God said he was for them. That they had gone out and looked for, like, specific deities. And so it's, whether we like that or not, don't care. Okay? Ezekiel looked at that and thought, well, no wonder. Like, we had it coming, guys. So in what way do we want to emulate a culture who the culmination of their story is Assyria killed most of them, and then Babylon took the rest and let a few come back? And the problem is that we've got this and why I'm doing what I'm doing. We don't read the Bible to read the Bible. We read the Bible to get to Jesus. Like when we're reading it, we're like always like, oh, we gotta just be patient. Jesus helps with your Christian theology, but there's a lot of stuff going on back here that was written before he was around. So it's not written with him in mind. Okay? So let's just read a few of what these guys have to say, and then we'll close it out. And I said Westerman earlier, I mean von Rad. He said Genesis 26 is a mosaic of Isaac's stories and contains the only quote-unquote Isaac traditions. And that means like Abraham has specific traditions that are attributed to him, but they're kind of throughout his stories. And so does Isaac, but they're only found in Genesis 26. So, Gordon Wenham in the Word Biblical Commentary says, within the Jacob cycle, and that just is a fancy scholar word for like the story of Jacob's life. It has an equally important role after this, and he's just talking about Genesis 26 as a whole. After the turbulent beginning to the story with Jacob and Esau wrestling in their mother's womb and Jacob seizing the first opportunity to obtain his brother's rights, this chapter presents us with an interlude. We see Isaac as a timid, peace-loving man who avoids conflict with his neighbors wherever possible, such a contrast to his contentious sons who are forever squabbling. This chapter therefore serves to heighten our appreciation of the unnaturalness of the intrafamilial strife that is about to tear apart Isaac's family in the following chapter. So did you catch that? Like he's saying this whole motif of how peaceful Isaac is in Genesis 26 is almost there to show you how bad it really was, what happens next. Okay? He says, yet Isaac receives the promises without fighting for them. He is pushed around by the Philistines, yet at the end they come to asking him for a treaty. If Isaac could achieve so much without manipulating people, why do Jacob and Rebekah have to resort to the tactics about to be described? Chapter 26 also underlines what is at issue in Jacob's deceitful acquisition of Isaac's blessing. Here we are reminded of Isaac's great wealth. And then Westerman says, the transmitter who constructed chapter 26 and inserted it in this place in the patriarchal story, and that shouldn't surprise us, like I said, it's very clearly contextually out of order because there are no children in the story of the king and the sisterhood thing. But he's saying the person who did this wanted to point out to later generations that Isaac's greatness, which grew out of Yahweh's blessing, led not to the extension of his domain or to victory over to his opponents, but to final peace. I thought that was good. It was the culmination of Yahweh's blessing led to peace, not to more things. I want to read something here. Yeah, okay, so here is, we kind of talked a little bit about, like, there's this discrepancy, and I've found that the best places to go or a best place to go when there's a discrepancy in the biblical text is to some kind of rabbinic commentary or a Jew. Jewish Publication Society is who Nahum Sarna writes for. And because there's kind of a presumption in Judaism about the Hebrew text that A, nothing is by accident, so if you see a repetition, that's for a reason, not by an accident. And then B, that there are no contradictions. And evangelical Christianity has kind of taken that and put it on steroids and made it to mean something that's not what they mean. But what they mean is there aren't any contradictions, so when you see them, you need to study. And it's just, so they just acknowledge that there are some, right? And so when you see them, you got to study out and figure out what's going on. And I think Sarna does a good job here with giving us a good Jewish exegesis of why these two places, for my money, where I stand as like a historical student and a biblical student, I see these as two different stories for how this location got its name. And I don't think that they need to be connected. And I think that there are tribal narratives that were adopted by the confederation of tribes that came back together, and they were kind of all woven together skillfully by a group of priests. And that's a topic for another day. But All of that to say, like, I think that there are conflicting stories because we got multiple storytellers. Okay? And I think that there are a lot of scholars that agree with that. And there's a lot that disagree. And what have we learned by now? If you ask a dozen scholars, you'll get 24 answers. That really is how it works. So Sarna here says the coincidence is highly significant. It indicates a causal relationship between the name Beersheba and the oath-taking ceremony just completed. One would expect then that the well would be called Shavua, which is the Hebrew term for oath, rather than Shiva, which means 7. Okay, so we've just for some reason, when Isaac and Abimelech go there, they swear, therefore it's called Beersheba, because they swore an oath. Well, Shavua is oath, not Shiva. So what's going on there? He says, the anomaly proves that the present story presupposes a knowledge of the earlier one involving Abraham and Abimelech. There the number 7 predominates. Moreover, the names Abraham and Abimelech occur in the present chapter precisely 7 times each, just as they do in the first story. Accordingly, our narrative about Isaac entails implicit wordplay on Shiva and Shavua that is intelligible only in the context of the earlier narrative. This leads to the conclusion that verse 33 is not intended to suggest that Isaac first coined and applied the name Beersheba, but rather that he endowed the name previously given by Abraham with new contemporary meaning and that he gave it currency. As verse 18 notes, Isaac made a practice of giving the wells the same names that his father had given them. And then it says, therefore, the name of the city. And then Sarna goes on to note, no city of Beersheba is ever mentioned in connection with patriarchal activities because, as archaeological research has shown, no such city existed at that time. Okay, so we heard that correct, right? Not only, so what Sarna is saying is Isaac employed a name that he knew his dad had used for this place. But the editor is telling you a different reason for that. Why? Because the editor knows the earlier story and the significance of 7. That's the only reason. He just kept the wording in there because it's already connected that way. Okay? And then he goes on to just kind of throw this in. Oh, by the way, no city of Beersheba ever existed. What? So what does that mean? What's going on? Why does the Bible say, therefore the name of the city? And they actually do use the word for city. Because an editor is letting you know that at the time of editing, there's a city there, but not in the patriarchal time. Okay? So it's at least letting you know when it's edited, or giving us a outer limit of when it could have been edited, because there's no city called Beersheba during the patriarchal time. So there's no way that part of the story could have been composed during the patriarchal time, right? So that's an editor again. And sometimes these editorial notes are very important. And they let us know, like, oh, hey, this actually wouldn't have been in what we would call like an original text. This is a later editor letting us know, hey, you don't know what that is. So I'm going to tell you. And sometimes what they say, it's like, yeah, that place name got changed to this, and like historians know that. And then sometimes they say that which is that, and it's wrong. But we don't know that because we don't study, right? And so what we do is we let the guy up front bring us information and tell us what everything means, because credibility is garnered by good lighting and makeup and having a TV program, right? That's how you get credibility. You don't get credibility by studying and studying outside your tradition. That's kind of big, right? Like, I know that, like, I don't want to be a jerk here, but I know that there are a lot of like pastors who have gone through seminary and gotten trained by their denomination. That's great. Good for you. You got learned in how to pastor your denomination according to your theology. But very, very few, unless they go to some specific schools, learn anything outside of their own stream. Or if they do, it's only how to refute it. And if they do, it's usually just other Christian streams. And it's like, well, like, there are other religions that use parts of our Bible. Right. And like I said before, I don't think Christianity should be the only religion allowed to pick up the Bible and go, oh, I found wisdom here. Yeah, that's right.
Why?
Oh, because we have Jesus. If you had Jesus, you would be able to find wisdom in the Bible, but because you're a Jew, you're screwed. No, silliness. It's their book. Jews wrote the entire book. New Testament too. Okay, they weren't Christians, the guys that wrote the New Testament. I mean, you don't even find out till Acts that they were called Christians, like as a pejorative in Antioch. And it's like, but before then, they're just Jews, writing, doing what Jews do. And then, but we're the only ones who get, because, see, what had to happen was the message had to get filtered through Europe so that it could be perfected, sharpened, and turned into an empire. Oh, wait. And so I think as we continue to go through here, we're going to start seeing some things. And as we get going in our less public times, we're going to be able to go a little deeper into some things because we'll be able to actually open up a book and read a few things. Because I think all of this stuff it not only matters for if you want to talk about the Bible, right? But it also matters for if you want to talk about your own faith. And it's the stories of Jesus are a mosaic, sorry to tell you that, of Old Testament stories where they have put Jesus in the main character role. And that doesn't mean, oh, Jesus didn't exist. That doesn't mean, oh, all the stories about Jesus are made up. It means Jesus was a Jew, and Jewish writers wrote about him in a very Jewish way. And one of the ways that Jewish writers wrote about important figures was to put them in important stories. Stories they already knew. Like stories of where one patriarch has already done this thing, another one's going to do the same thing. Why? Because he's now the bearer of the promise. And so anytime they do this, this is what they're saying. In some way, this person is the important one, the bearer, the oath filler, the God or whatever. You good? And so we just saw with Isaac, right? They did. Abraham goes to Gerar, tells the king that Sarah is his sister. Oh, well, let's be good writers and let's put Isaac in the same position because we want you to know that not only is Isaac Abraham's child, but he gets to carry the promise. So much so that he's going to do some of the same things. And then you get to the New Testament, and where does Jesus go? With his parents. He goes down to Egypt. And he does the same thing the other patriarchs did, except for he doesn't lie and say that his wife is his sister. Well, that we know of. There's a lot that's not recorded about Jesus. I mean, no. So you see this stuff, and especially as we go Genesis and Exodus. I think once you get out of Exodus, it really does take some skillful work to get you through Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Not because they're boring, but not just because they're boring, but because of how much of a time span is covered by those three books. I mean, just archaeologically, what we know about how much of a time span is covered by those three books. Okay, and so there's so much of a there. But Genesis is dealing with stuff that's it's prehistory. There's not a lot of writing, so there's a lot of oral tradition, so there's a lot of overlap. And this is why we get it, right? Different tribes saying the same thing about different guys. Or saying the same, giving the same attributes to different deities. And then later on, those deities all coming under one banner, and that banner being Yahweh. Right? And so that at some point in the history of all this, a priest of a Yahwist bent came along and said, hey, whatever you guys are calling him is fine. Just understand that the name that is above all other names is Yahweh. And he's like, so if when you're worshiping God, you're worshiping Yahweh. That means if you're worshiping El Shaddai, you're worshiping Yahweh. And so they started taking all these names in and so throughout the whole thing, they're constantly saying, this name is above all other names. And we actually get that phrasing from Paul. and has given him the name that is above all other names. And so it's not new. Paul isn't like some radical new thinker that's changing everything. He's like, oh, Judaism is stupid. I have the answers. That's not how he's a Jew. He's interested in reforming Judaism. And so is Jesus. And he's like, hey, I've got the idea. Let's go ahead and love our neighbors. Let's love our enemies. That doesn't leave anyone else. There's no third category between enemy and neighbor. Exes? No. No. And again, though, does Jesus, Dad just taught this last week. Does Jesus invent love your neighbor? No, he lifts it from Leviticus. Oddly enough, as much as we grace people hate Leviticus and Deuteronomy, Jesus quotes those more than he quotes most of the other Old Testament. And not in a derogative way, or pejorative way. He is fine with Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And he's just saying, hey, you've just gotten it wrong. You've missed the point here. You're focusing on the details and missing the point. You're asking too many questions. Don't work on the Sabbath. Well, what color is the sunrise on the Sabbath? That's the first question in the Mishnah. And then there's 6 answers by different rabbis. And Jesus is saying, you're focusing on the wrong stuff. And the Mishnah, this started in Jesus' time, this rabbinic debates. And it's not that they're unimportant. It's not that one of them is wrong. They're trying to do their best to follow the law of God. Don't work on the Sabbath. Okay, I want to know exactly what time that is. I don't have a clock. What color is the sky when Sabbath begins? Right? Rabbi so-and-so says it's orange. Rabbi so-and-so says, no, it's black. Rabbi so-and-so says, oh, but you have to wait for the stars to come out. So there's different answers, and Jesus is saying, yeah, that's neat, but I'm going to go ahead and pick grain. So it's not about what color the sky is. It's about the intent of the law. Okay? We're way off track, and I'm out of Genesis 26, and so that's it for today. You're dismissed.